So welcome everyone to the Delta Thinks Open Access Data and Analytics Tool webinar, using data to drive decisions, libraries, publishers, and the new open. We've had a fantastic response to today's session. And so clearly this is a topic of interest, and we're very much looking forward to an interesting presentation and hopefully a lively Q&A session as well. So keep your questions or note down your questions so that we can talk about them after the presentations. I'm going to start off with a few introductions. I'm Lori Carlin, Chief Commercial Officer at Delta Think, and I'll be moderating the session for you today. For those of you who are not familiar with Delta Think, we're a consulting firm working primarily in scholarly publishing and association management. We were first established in 2005 and have worked with over 120 organizations in the scholarly publishing and scholarly communications space to date, supporting their needs around technology strategy, business analysis and strategy, and market research and go-to-market strategies. And we also own and maintain the Delta Think Open Access Data and Analytics tool, which you'll hear a bit more about in our session today. With me is Heather Staines, Delta Think Senior Consultant and Director of Community Engagement for the Open Access and Data Analytics tool, and she'll be leading the presentation today. Heather is joined by our esteemed guest speakers, Ádám Dér, who is a member of the license management team of the Planck Digital Library, where his main responsibilities center around publisher negotiations to advance the open access transition in scholarly publishing. And in this role, he's involved in a broad range of strategic activities, including data analysis and financial modeling. And then we also have Mat Willmott with us, who is the open access collection strategist at the California Digital Library, where his primary role involves conducting data analysis, financial modeling, and strategic planning relating to transformative agreements, which also encompasses both access to content and open access publication. So again, welcome everyone. And with that, I will turn over to Heather to begin our session today.
Thanks, Lori. It's great to be here today, as Lori mentioned, to talk to you a little bit about how librarians are using the Open Access Data and Analytics tool. Our first presenter is going to be Matt. And while he shares his screen, I'll just remind you that we have the Q&A box available for questions. I think mainly we're going to be handling questions at the end, but if it's a real quick yes or no thing that Nat or Ádám, can answer, they may go ahead and do that. But we, as Lori mentioned, we always like to have a lively Q&A, so we want to save some of that stuff till the end. So take it away, Matt.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks, Lori. So as Lori and Heather said, I'm Mat Willmott. I'm the Open Access Collection Strategist at the California Digital Library, and I'm really excited to be a part of this webinar. The topic of data-driven decision-making really gets to the heart of how I've built my career in my recent years, and the entry point I had to make a meaningful contribution to the transition to open access. And we've also been using the Delta Think's Open Access Data and Analytics tool for a few years now, and have found some of the data that we're getting from it really invaluable as we're embarking on a lot of this data analysis. So I'm really happy to be talking here. I thought I'd start by giving a quick overview of what CDL is, what progress we've made. So the California Digital Library handles many of the system-wide projects across the University of California libraries, including, among other things, central negotiations with publishers. The UC system on the whole publishes about 30,000 articles per year, where the lead or the corresponding author is a UC author. And then CDL and UC on the whole is working on many pathways towards a transition to open access. So my work in particular focuses on our efforts to enable open access via agreements with publishers, trying to bring OA to the places where our authors are already choosing to publish. But we have several groups at CDL working on several different pathways as well. To date, we've reached 11 agreements with publishers that we call transformative, and these are with all different types of publishers. So I've listed a couple examples there, but one of the things that we really try to do is work with a diversity of publishers, not just focus on sort of the large commercial packages. At this point, about a third of all articles published by UC authors are eligible to be made open access under our agreements. So moving forward, thousands of articles each year will be made OA through these efforts. So I'm going to break my time this morning into two main parts. First, I'll talk about some of the data questions that we pursue in an effort to guide our strategy in negotiating with publishers for transformative agreements. I'll show some examples of the types of outputs that we build for these purposes. In the interest of time, I won't go too deep into any one analysis, but certainly I'm happy to talk further about any of these items during the Q&A or later offline. And then I'll talk a little bit about what it means to be part of an organization with such a focus on data-driven decision-making. So the first question we generally ask ourselves is what our place is in the publishing landscape. And there are a few ways to answer that question. The main approach we take is to investigate how much our authors are publishing, where, how much of that content is openly available now. This screenshot from one of our dashboards shows our approach to viewing that data, identifying which publishers have the most UC research with the ability to filter by various facets like campus or open access status in order to drill down further into the data. Another question we're generally keen to answer is how much our authors are spending on APCs outside of our subscription agreements. So this is a screenshot from a previous analysis I conducted to calculate how much more revenue each publisher receives from the UC system via author APC payments on top of our subscription payment. This is all revenue that's usually very difficult to track. It has no comprehensive contract to govern the interaction with the publishers. As you might expect, publishers with different characteristics tend to have widely varying amounts of additional revenue coming from authors in this way. So this shows an example of a few different publishers and how much that impacts UC's engagement with that publisher. Once we have a reasonable handle on what our place is in the landscape, the next question is how we move forward. So this is an anonymized example of a prioritization grid that we built to examine which publishers made the most appropriate targets for negotiations in a given year. So this includes basic quantitative factors like publication volume, that's what's on the x-axis, and also quantified representations of more qualitative factors like alignment with the academic mission, commitment to full transition to open access, openness to working with us on an appropriate business model, and precedent for the marketplace. So we've quantified all of those and put those on the y-axis. That helps us sort of segment our publishers and determine which ones we think would be the most fruitful negotiations. Once we've identified which publishers to try to work with, we can undertake a deeper examination of the publishing patterns of a specific publisher to better understand our output there and develop a strategy. So are our authors publishing a lot of open access articles there already? Do our authors with that publisher tend to have grant funding? Is our authorship spread across all UC campuses or focused in one or two? As you might imagine, the answers to these vary widely by publisher, and these are all important factors to consider as we develop our strategy. Then we need to do some modeling about what we can expect in the future. It's very important to build out models which can calculate potential outcomes of an agreement under various parameters. So this screenshot represents one panel of a model that shows us how much the library and authors would spend under given assumptions of open access uptake and other factors of author behavior within the business model employed. And this chart shows a risk table that we build to observe where there may be challenges based on variance of multiple variables within a model. In this case, the redder cells in the bottom left represent some potential for risk to the library, while the green cells on the far right represent more positive outcomes. So we then need to assess the likelihood of each of those outcomes and determine if appropriate mechanisms need to be negotiated to control for these risk factors. And then finally, we at CDL just last fall reached the point of our agreements where we need to start assessing real world outcomes and considering how to iterate and improve upon them as we renew our agreements. It's one thing to model potential outcomes, but quite another to actually observe them in the real world and learn from them. So what I've put up here is a somewhat annoyingly blurred image, but this represents one panel of a large dashboard that we use to assess each agreement and identify areas for improvement moving forward. I've made it blurry because there's a lot here which we really still need to digest ourselves before putting out in the world. But it's worth mentioning that on the whole, data analytics is better as a shared exercise. So we do plan to talk more widely about the outcomes of our agreements, particularly as we develop our own understanding and advance forward in our efforts to transition our full output to open access. In the end, all of this analytical work gives us some valuable outputs to move us towards our goals of reaching additional open access agreements. We're able to develop a cohesive strategy for where to focus our efforts, and these analyses provide us the supporting data we need to discuss with our stakeholders, a sense of what the impact of an agreement could be, a good picture of where there may be unique challenges with a given publisher, and a set of stress-tested models and risk control mechanisms with a given publisher that'll hopefully bring us to a successful agreement. Additionally, once we have an agreement in place, we're able to gather data and learn from it to make sure that we're always iterating both within each individual agreement and across our entire strategy to determine if there's any course correction or additional efforts we need to undertake to make the agreements work. So with that, what does it mean to operate as a data-driven organization? It really requires a full organizational approach. In terms of resources required for conducting these types of analyses, we at CDL currently have 2 staff positions that are dedicated to data analysis of this type to ensure that we have the capacity for robust analysis. But our organizational commitment to data-driven decision-making doesn't stop there. Instead, it extends to all stakeholders in our efforts to transition our subscription investments to open access. So to best foster effective data-driven decision-making, the organization needs to commit to not just receiving analysis results and incorporating them into strategic thinking, but also to engage with these analyses at all levels to help iterate on them, add different perspectives, make them more robust and impactful. That iteration is really important as we go through this process. I'm fortunate to work for a library that's committed to this pathway, where analytical conversations happen with all stakeholders, including library administration and faculty. So while the functional work falls to me and my analyst colleague, the real commitment is system-wide. Of course, there will be a range of facility with data analysis across the organization, and it's important to be deliberate about communications to bring all voices, even those with less of a data bent, into the conversation. It's therefore really important to develop visualizations which have clear messages and to talk with stakeholders to make sure that those messages get across. This can be a challenge, but reaps massive rewards in terms of inclusivity, buy-in, and wider perspective. And finally, we're also deeply committed to collaborations with other institutions and organizations. And here the visibility of some of our work has really helped us to make some beneficial connections with colleagues outside of UC. It's worth noting that these collaborations go both ways. We're able to benefit from the experience of others, which can help us shape the questions that we ask, find different strategies to answer those questions, and put a new perspective on the answers that we find. All of that definitely makes our own work better. And then we're also able to widen the impact of our own analysis by sharing our processes and experiences and helping others conduct their own local analysis work based on what we've done, and oftentimes even going further than what we've done or building on that as a basis. Working in a data-driven library has some really strong benefits that have helped advance us to the point that we're at now. In communications with our stakeholders, especially faculty and researchers, we're much more conversant in our strategies and our overall approaches. Many of those stakeholders are data-driven in their everyday academic work, and so they appreciate when we exhibit the same careful analysis to craft and refine our strategies, and it helps us build support for our intended pathways. For ourselves, we can be much clearer and more confident about our strategy when we've crunched the numbers behind it and we have a real sense of what we're doing and why. And in-depth data analysis has allowed us to better understand areas of potential risk, particularly financial risk to the institution in these agreements. Many of our agreements have cost control mechanisms, which are born specifically out of our analysis. Based on risk tables like the one I showed earlier, we can understand where to employ these mechanisms in our negotiations, and also what factors to watch during implementation so that we can try to take any action early if necessary. So it's really the organizational commitment to engaging in data analysis and building the results into our approaches that's allowed us to come as far as we have and to achieve the successes that I described on the first slide. So thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing any questions or discussion you have at the end, but I know that we're holding questions until the end, so at this point, I believe I will pass it off to Ádám.
Yep, thanks, Matt. Looks good.
Good. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, it's really good to be here. And yeah, thank you, Matt, for the wonderful presentation. I think there will be a lot of repetition, but yeah, there will be a lot of things from your talk that I will also echo in my presentation. So as it was mentioned in the introduction, my name is Ádám Dér. I work in the license management team of the Planck Digital Library, and so just for you to understand our place, the Planck Digital Library is a central service unit of the Max Planck Society, which is one of the leading research organizations of the world. Our researchers publish around 15,000 articles a year, and the Max Planck Society itself has been very active in the open access landscape. We have been one of the initiators of the Berlin Declaration, which you, I think, definitely have heard of, and our team also has contributed to the literature in the MPDL white paper from 2015, which I think it's very well known in the community, which was I think one of the very first data-driven paper that showed that there is already enough money in the subscription system in order to facilitate, a large-scale transition to open access. And we are also, just a final point, we are also hosting many community activities such as the OE 2020 and the ESEC initiatives. So Matt talked about the data analysis and how it shapes the organization in terms of analytics and such. I will mainly talk about strategical considerations and also a little bit of community engagement and how we can work together as a community to drive this open access transition. So really, our aim here at the Max Planck Digital Library is to make open access publishing as easy as possible for our authors. And one of the central strategy to achieve this is really to pursue transformative agreements, but not just with large commercial publishers, but also, as also Matt said, this is very similar in our strategy, but we also small society-based publishers. We are also facilitating central open access billing agreements with fully open access publishers. We are also supporting innovative business models and diamond initiatives. And here, what you can see, this is already some sort of like a data-based strategy that how we tend to look at our publishing output is that you can see this is the pie chart that represents where the Max Planck Society authors tend to publish their papers, which publishers, and you can see that we were over time we could turn most of our output. So I think I can with reasonable certainty say that 80% of the Max Planck Society's output is now open access, thanks to the strategies around transformative agreements. And you can see, for example, that in case we are not successful in our negotiations, we are also empowered to walk away from subscription agreement. And really, so as you can see here, currently we have 23 transformative agreements and 10 fully open access billing agreements with fully open access publishers. And really, this is really one strategy where we're trying to reorganize the library's previous subscription budget in order to support open access publishing of our authors. So basically, we are trying to move away from the subscription logic when you prepay in order to get access to paywall content, but move into a world where you organize your budget in order to support your authors in their publishing needs. So you remunerate basically publishers based on the services that your authors get from them, and there are a lot of interesting dynamics in that. But really, the essence is that instead of fixed prepayments of the subscription world, we are operating a flexible budget based on where our authors are publishing, and basically we are putting our money where our mouth is. And we have a lot of support. So as Matt said, they also have dedicated people in their team that deal with data analytics. Here at Planck Digital Library, we have a special unit. So basically one team of data analysts who, for example, support our team in the license management team with tailored reports in order to prepare for our negotiations, but they're also producing reports for each and every Max Planck Institute. So we have 85 research institute under the umbrella of the Max Planck Society. So they are also producing publishing reports or citation reports for our institutes. But one of their tasks, or one of the things that they're working on, is really that helping us in the licensing team and supplying us with similar reports and dashboards what Matt showed. So like shares of publications, trends of publications within a journal portfolio or across publishers, or citation trends, and they're also integrating usage data in these sorts of reports. So I think I'm quite privileged to work in this environment where we have all these reports already pre-made and just supplied to us, and then within the license team we can work based on that and take that in the preparations for our negotiations. And so in the second part of my talk, I really just wanted to introduce a couple of resources from the EASC initiative, which you hopefully heard of. If not, I can also post links to the chat. And I just wanted to introduce a couple of community resources that the EASC initiative published in the last 12 months, to say. And what you will see is that data is always a centerpiece of these community resources. So I think around one year ago we published this guide called Uncover the Publishing Profile of your institution, and it's really a detailed introduction of where you as a library might start when you want to start analyzing your institution publishing output. So like we try to formulate questions that you might want to ask. For example, in what journals your authors are publishing, what percentage of them, of those papers are written by or published by corresponding authors from your institutions, which is probably a most likely estimation of what would be where your authors should be responsible for APC payments, how often your authors are publishing open access articles, for which there are costs probably outside of your library budgets, and so on and so forth. So this is really a very hands-on guide in order to assess your own position, and it's a really like data-centric approach. Last December, we also published the ESEC reference guide to transformative agreements, which introduces threads together many existing resources around how to prepare for negotiations for transformative agreements, how to conduct negotiations, and what to look out for when you are implementing transformative agreements. And here also data is very in the very center of the reference guide. So when you are asking questions around how to, if you want to understand your negotiation counterparts, you need data not only on your own institution but also on the entity with which you are negotiating, or you can use data in order to formulate your objectives and goals for negotiations. And also you need data to implement successful agreements with every kind of publisher. And finally, this is also probably a little bit less than a year old. We created this analysis called the ESEC Market Watch, and there also it is very data driven and data centric in order to understand the current trends in the scholarly communications ecosystem. And the focus of the Market Watch is largely on transformative agreements and how these change the dynamics in the scholarly communication system, but it can also be taken as an inspiration for conducting your own analysis. So I also recommend that that you take a look. And finally, on OADAT, the open access data analytics tool, by that I think we are also a subscriber for that tool, and we just as Matt said, we also find it very invaluable in sort of understanding the current trends in the entire scholarly communications landscape. So and we are also utilizing that in order to prepare for negotiations, to keep track of changes, to to look at the market size and the dynamics and the growth of open access, changes in journal business models and prices, journals flipping to open access, these sort of things. We really value, for example, that is one aspect that I use quite a lot is the curated list of APCs, which we can further use in order when we are conducting these cost modeling exercises for future agreements. And it is very useful that it has these pre-generated charts that we can use in our communications with stakeholders and these sort of things. So I just wanted to show it to you, these ESEC resources, and that thing is moving from the very granular, from your own institution through negotiations, through up until the very universal trends in the scholarly communications ecosystem. Thank you so much, and just as much, I also look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Ádám. Yeah, I'm so bursting with excitement that I'm not 100% sure where to start. I do have some slides, but Ádám mentioned the tracking of the APCs that we do inside the tool. And I thought maybe before I go through my slides and tell you our idea, that I could just show you briefly the area in the tool that they are talking about for folks on the phone who are non-subscribers. This is a section of the Open Access Data and Analytics tool, and it's called Publisher APC Ranges. And we just completed an exercise within the last couple of weeks for doing the update for last year. And so we're going to have a webinar at the end of the month, and I think Lori can drop that information into the chat. But one of the charts that Ádám referred to that pops into my mind always when I think about how publishers are charging their APCs is this particular chart, which has the different cost buckets across the bottom, and then within each of those, the publishers, the number of titles that they have, and where those fall in terms of the bucket range. So keep this kind of in the back of your mind for the slides that I'm going to show you. And then the other slide, the other chart that I wanted to show you is the changes, the trends in APCs over time. And again, I think both Matt and Ádám talked about the importance of keeping an eye on, what is happening over time. So at Delta Think, we've been collecting this information for a number of years now. So you can see in this chart that it goes back to 2015, 2016, and the darker curves here are the older years. And then as you get closer to the present, it gets lighter, and with the most recent one being pink. So this is a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be talking about in the webinar in a couple of weeks, but kind of keep these curves in mind, and we can talk more about it after I'm through showing the slides. So let me jump over into my deck. All right. And I do need to apologize. I had misspelled Matt's first name. I fixed it now. All should be well in the world, we would hope. So in thinking about how we were hearing from libraries that they were using the open access data and analytics tool, we had an idea that we've been kicking around, for the past 6-7 months or so. What if we could help more libraries figure out how their data compares to the market? And in particular, I'm thinking of libraries, as Ádám said, maybe that are not as well resourced or don't have as many data analysts on the board. So a couple of slides here. My colleague Dan Pollock, who couldn't be with us today, prepared these just to kind of show you how we think this idea might play out. And our call for action at the end of the deck is going to be, if you want to work with us to try to see if this proof of concept can be brought to fruition, I'll let you know how you can do that. So, so Dan put together a little model, and what he did was he took the data that we have in the tool, which spans 7 years, and then focused on the last 3 years to get an average of the curves that I showed you just a second ago. And what we see here in terms of the APC list prices, this is for about 15,000 journals that we track. The most common price points there, the 2,500 to 3,000 bucket and the 3,000 to 3,500, indicated by those green hashed lines there at the top. So these are the most common list prices across the data for all of the journals that we have in our system. So now we would take a look at one institution's output and put that on the same graph as that list APC price curve. So imagine taking one institution, and imagine your institution here, and then this orange line, which for this demonstration is driven by data that we pulled from the Open APC article set. So just a few caveats around that data set. It seems that the publishers are not always consistent from year to year in that set, and to a large degree, It's dependent upon authors' self-reporting, but it's a data set that was available for us to use here, but don't read, sort of too much into the individual orange lines. One of the things we'd be looking to try to determine is where the data sets might be available. So for our randomly selected institution here, you can see the orange curve. There's an increased use of the sort of mid to high price range indicated there by the green arrow. So largely, a lot of publications are happening at the lower end. So it might be interesting to look at the journals that this particular institution has that correspond to those slightly higher APC ranges. And that would be information that would be useful for the library team, the research team to take into consideration. So now we want to look at one institution and one publisher. So the blue line here in this case is information from a random publisher. And the orange line is information from a random institution. So it's a little bit of a complicated curve, but we can see by the top of that orange curve that this particular institution is paying less for this publisher than we see across the board for that publisher. So the average IPCs across the board for the publisher are around the 3,000 to 3,500 mark, but looking at the data for this institution, it's tending to come in highest there at the 2,000 to 2,500 mark. And we also see a lot of activity in that lower range, the 1,500 mark, and then also in the higher range, 4,000 to 4,500. So this would be an indication that maybe a deeper dive into the journals that are connecting with those particular APC ranges. So we can also look at discounting patterns for a particular publisher. And so now the colors here have changed from the previous slide. The gold color being the fully OA and the blue color being the hybrid. And we can see here that almost all of the output from this particular publisher does get a discount. That lower left bar, which is just a tiny line there, are articles that carry no discount on their APCs. So most articles have some type of discount. And you can see how that plays out across the board. This publisher discounts in most instances. The highest, the higher percentage discounts that you see are more commonly happening on the fully OA journals. And now here's how our random institution fares with this particular publisher in regards to the discounting tiers across the board. So in this case, our institution is getting higher than average discounts from this publisher as compared to the previous slide. Many more articles falling into the 20 to 30% and the 30 to 40%, a larger uptake of hybrid articles overall from this particular institution. And then as we move toward the right, the higher percentage discounts coming into play with the fully OA journal. So perhaps this is indicative of some agreements that the publisher, that the institution has in place with the publisher. It could be something that's a little bit due to the research focus for that publisher. So those are the slides that I wanted to show you, which Dan Pollock was kind enough to mock up for me, of some of the things that we could do in terms of a proof of concept around incorporating institutional data with individual publisher data. And we want to move forward and improve, this proof of concept. So we're looking for a variety of institutions who might be willing to work with us on it. And so you can email me at heatherstaines@deltathink.com if your institution would like, to get involved, with this process. And I'm happy to set up calls to tell you a little bit more about that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and invite our other speakers to come back on camera. And Lori is going to moderate a little bit of discussion.
Sure. Thank you all. That was great. Great talks and presentations. I'm going to go back to the beginning. I was debating where to go with the questions, but we don't have a ton. So I think we'll start at the beginning. And these came through during, I think, Matt's presentation, but they can apply to Ádám, I think, as well. So the first one, and certainly for both of you, was how many tools such as the Delta Think OA data and analytics tool do your institutions use to gather this information and include it in your homegrown dashboards?
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah.
We use a couple of tools. It's worth noting that there's a growing number out there as the need and possibility for these types of analyses increases, and that's exciting because each one has its own sort of focus and can offer a unique type of insight. Right. But a lot of what I showed in my slides, at least, is homegrown. So several of those were screenshots from Tableau, where we've built a series of dashboards to help ourselves do the assessment that we're working on. We're thinking about ways to share that more widely. We're not quite there yet. That's definitely something we're interested in exploring more, to make it so that some of these homegrown tools aren't just benefiting us, but could be repurposed elsewhere, right? Some of the other screenshots I showed were from Excel-based tools or visualizations. I have shared a lot of those, and I'm happy to do that more with folks if it's useful. A lot of that involves finding the right data sources, pulling in the data, normalizing it, and building out those tools, right? That's a lot of work that we've had the capacity to do, and I'm happy to share that too. So,
Ádám, from your perspective.
I think the key is what Matt said, that it's not really the tools, it's more of the manual and work that goes into normalization and putting everything in a meaningful context. So like apart from bibliographic databases where we pull data from, OA, that is, I think, like one of the only tools that we actually subscribe to. So like and so our data team pulls data from Web of Science, from Scopus, from our own institutional repository or CRIS system. Then they enrich it with data from OnPaywall, from Crossref, from many other sources. There's a lot of normalization going on, and they are using Python, but we are using Excel as the report, or for further analyzing the data in the license team. But those dashboards, most of them are really homegrown and combining various data sources.
Yeah. And then again, I think applies to both of you. Do you do any work to add in your own department or university information to the corresponding author information to see patterns within your campus, or see how the information aligns with your authors in particular?
We definitely look at things across campuses for sure. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of slice and dice the data. We haven't been directly mapping department level data from sort of our own internal HR systems into our data sets. It's the author data we have that we get from the sources that we use. I mean, our main primary source is Web of Science. The the match to author or researcher level data coming from another system would be very difficult and require a fair bit of manual work to do that. So we haven't been mapping in things at an author level as much as we can look at what data we can get about the article in particular, right? So to get at things like patterns across or within campuses or specific disciplines, which is really of keen interest to us. We look more at the article or journal level at subject data that we're able to get from Web of Science or from other sources, and start to do some analyses like that. And some interesting things are popping out of that, which help us sort of understand differences in author behavior. We can bring that to bear in thinking about, like I was saying, thinking about our renewals, also thinking about working with other publishers that are maybe discipline focused. We can learn from our current agreements how authors in that discipline behave and know what to expect in another future agreement. So there's a lot we can learn from that.
Great, thank you. Ádám, anything you want to add?
I think our situation, yeah, sorry, thank you. Yes, I think our situation is somewhat different than the University of California, because of course, like, we have different Max Planck institutes with different profiles. So like the publishing profile of the Max Planck Institute of Astronomy will be really different to the Max Planck Institute of Biophysical Chemistry. So like as a research organization with many institutes, I think it's different, and that is also visible in the affiliation of the authors on the paper. So it's not just Max Planck Society, but it's the institutional level. And of course, so as I think I mentioned, our data analytics team, they provide these institutional level reports to the institutes themselves, and they do this for the agreements. We don't really differentiate. We always, enter into these agreements as one entity covering all, like the entirety of the output of the Max Planck Society, and we are not differentiating. So like, I don't know, institutes with a profile in international law are equally eligible to publish in biophysical chemistry journals than other. So we don't make a differentiation, but I can see, like, in the question of Eric, that, like, for example, when you start embarking in the strategy and you want faculty engagement and you want to involve them in supporting your library in the strategy, like these sorts of granular reports can be quite helpful to achieve faculty buy-in in embarking on these strategies.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you both. Heather, we have some questions, I think, that are more geared perhaps to the tool itself. So in OADAT, how do we handle the subscribe to open type articles and content when we're looking at the APC information?
Yeah. So the data from all of the content that's covered under the rapidly growing, subscribe to open model is, of course, in OADAT now. The challenge, as is with all these things, is identifying it. And so just for comparison purposes on, the transformative agreement side, because we track that and ESAC tracks that, we can do ISN mapping in a relatively straightforward manner. So we can say, this is the subset of the journal space that falls into transformative agreements, and we can, kind of continually update that over time. So what I would like to put together is a kind of, because I don't think that this is out there yet, but I think it could be, so correct me if I'm wrong, Tricia, if you're keeping an eye on that, is a kind of subscribe to open growing tracker, for the journals that have kind of declared, being under that model. So then we can do that similar ISSN mapping from the journals in that space, and not just journals, but books and the like that are falling under those models. So it's great that the sort of definition of what we include and what we monitor in the tool is expanding and changing. And so we're looking at new pages, both on do something on Subscribe to Open, but also on transformative agreement modeling. And on that note, maybe some of you were in Charleston in November, and Jason Price and Michael Levine Clark and John McDonald and I talked about some data around the impact of big deals and whether the transformative agreements and the titles that fall into these big deals were having an impact on value. So there's so many interesting data questions, that we that are being asked, that we would like to ask, and definitely I see Subscribe to Open as having a lot of momentum in that space, and we should get a handle on the journals that kind of we can tag. It would be wonderful if there was some way in the metadata or the licenses, for that to be indicated. So maybe that's something to bring up, with NISO or some of our library colleagues with some of the standards that could potentially, add an element that would indicate that moving forward. So
Great, thank you. And then we have a question about, small library, not a lot of resources. OA.dot does have some publicly available information, news and views every month comes out with information, and there's usually some charts associated with that. But also some of what you're showing today is hopefully leading toward something, a product, a version that might be more targeted for specific library use. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, one of the things which is really surprising to me a year ago when I came over to Delta Think and started working on the tool is the library side, and the data being used. And we do have a number of subscribers that range from medium-sized libraries up through, large consortia. So we do have a range of pricing there. And when we think about other tools in the space, other tools can be extraordinarily, expensive in the tens, if not, hundreds of thousands, depending on your size. And I think that I'd be happy to talk to anyone about some pricing, but, depending upon the kind of APCs you might be seeing at your institution, we're talking like a couple of APCs. This is not a huge expense for libraries that, that are in that smaller category. And that's available now. That's people using the tool that way today. So reach out to me and we can have that conversation as soon as you like. What we're talking about for this proof of concept in the future is taking this sliver of the tool, because there's so much in there that's probably most relevant to publishers, taking a small portion of the highly targeted information that libraries need to inform these negotiations and making that available, as a separate product. And my goal is, and the reason I'm hoping we get some interest in the proof of concept, to make that available for a couple of $1,000s, in the range that Unsub has found success with their tool, because we want it to be affordable to as many libraries as possible. So in figuring out what we can do with the data that we have, what types of data libraries have available and are able to share, with privacy concerns being top of mind, and also data collection practices very widely. I'm hearing from libraries that they don't always know with a lot of confidence whether APC discounts, for example, are applied. So we want part of the discussions around the proof of concept is what kind of information is being collected, what can be collected. We're also looking at the Open Alex data set, which is tremendously exciting, to have that out there, because that is article level data, when in so many of the other data we have available to us, it tends to sit at the journal level. So that's opening up, a variety of possibilities for the future. But our goal is for our larger subscribers, we don't want to do anything that's going to, undermine the value that they get from their subscription, but we think that there are very specific pieces that can help libraries now, smaller libraries, medium-sized libraries, to be able to, have that additional insight, which certainly, those publishers who are joining us on the call have, that insight when they sit down at the negotiating table.
Thank you. And then we have time for one more question. And I have one here in the chat that was directed towards Matt. So curious about the cost modeling that you showed, Matt, which was something like a projected space of cost outcomes. What kind of analysis? And was this from DeltaThink or something else that you used there?
Yeah, that's actually an analysis that's been really key to a lot of our thinking lately. Like I was saying, that's how we assess a lot of our risks and judge where we need cost control measures or some sort of security measures that we want to negotiate with our publishers. So in terms of what kind of analysis, I mean, that was built out of an Excel sort of based model that looked at various parameters from either a negotiated or a potential negotiated agreement, as well as article level data that we use to make projections about what sort of future publication volume could look like, actual APC data. So that analysis was not directly from DeltaThink. The DeltaThink data could go into that analysis to help us reach that, right? If we're looking at what APCs we expect to be paid, we could look at APC list price data from the DeltaThink tool and map that into our analysis, right? So I would say that's one of the main ways that we at CDL use the DeltaThink tool a lot is mapping the data into local analysis projects that we're working on, and this would be a case where that's really useful, right? Knowing how much what the APCs would be on a range of articles that we expect to be published in a future year, and then the way that cost space or space of cost outcomes worked is like each axis was like the range from 0 to 100% of certain parameters of what to expect about author behavior, because that author behavior piece ends up being the real unknown in moving forward with one of our agreements that we need to sort of model what the outcomes could look like on. So I hope that got at your question.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to wrap up then. So thank you so much, Heather, Matt, and Ádám. This has been a great presentation today. And to all of you for joining us. I hope this was very useful. And again, we'll be holding our next open access news and views discussion session webinar on March 30th. We put the link in the chat. This will coincide with the release of our yearly APC update. So do sign up if that's something that's of interest to you. And finally, just to note that DeltaThink will be attending in person the London Book Fair, April 5th through 7th. So if anyone is interested in meeting in person, we're very excited to have an opportunity to see folks in a safe way. So get in touch if you'd like to set up a time to chat. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.